So I'm David Singleton. Thanks for the intro, Matt. I'm an engineering director here in Google. And engineers on my teams build key components of a lot of the products that all of us use every day. So I'm hoping that I can share some insight on what it's like on the inside with you today, and maybe give you some tips for your own businesses.
Exactly. And my team's job is pretty easy. So my team basically connects the amazing products that David and the other engineers build with users. So as long as you do that, that pretty much works.
Okay, we're here today to talk about innovation at Google. And hopefully we can share from both sides, both how it affects product development, how we innovate, and how it works in marketing. So looking at the next slide, if we can, we'd like to share with you 8 key principles that we really think are fundamental to how we innovate at Google. So the first of these is focus on the user and all else will follow. And this is really important. This is like the key thing that we use as we kind of figure out how to build all of our products. And it started right back at the inception of the company with Larry and Sergey building the first version of the Google search engine. And what you can see here is the screenshot of the Google homepage in 1998. And back then, most other search engines actually made their money by selling placement of search results in the natural search results. And Larry and Sergey thought, well, that doesn't make any sense because those are not the most relevant results for each search. And they believed that was wrong. They believed it was really important to, if you were going to have ads, have them clearly labeled and also have ads be relevant to whatever the user was looking for. And that's guided our development ever since. So if we take a look at a search results page today, if we switch to the other screen here. If we take a look at a search results page today, you can see here a search for digital cameras. And all of these results are relevant to that query. In this case, there are plenty of ads because you might be interested in buying a digital camera. But in fact, our focus on the user means that if you're searching for something where ads may not be the best result, we can show fewer or indeed no ads. So focus on the user is a really key principle of innovation. Another thing that we've found by focusing on the user is that we never go wrong if we make the experience fast. So fast always beats slow. And that happened right from the start. You may wonder, why are there only 10 results on a Google search results page rather than 20? We could certainly put 20 there. Well, 10 are faster, and we find that even differences in latency that are imperceptible to users affect their choice of search engine. So we keep the experience fast. And in fact, about 2 years ago, Larry gave a stopwatch, this stopwatch, in fact, to every single engineer at Google. And it's not uncommon for me to walk around the floor and see engineers actually timing key flows in the product because fast always beats slow. And that focus on reducing latency has led to what I think is probably the most fundamental change in how we deliver search results that we've ever made at the company. And we did this last year. We introduced a product called Google Instant. Now, you've seen it here just a little bit. But what we mean by Google Instant is that rather than asking the user to type their query and press enter when they're done, we actually update the search results as you refine your query. And what that means is that I can scroll here and see the other results. And that helps guide the search. So I can see with these suggestions how I may want to continue my search session. And also, if I have quite a long query, so for instance, I might be looking for the words to a song like what was it called again that we all sang earlier? Can't Take My Eyes Off You lyrics. It takes that long, so like 2 seconds to get right to the full lyrics of the song. Instant is pretty crazy from a technical perspective. So what happens here is we went from having to do one search to answer the user's query to actually needing to do between 5 and 7 search queries on our back end. Now, it probably will come as no surprise that a lot of Google's compute resources are actually dedicated to serving search queries. So can you imagine what the search infrastructure team said when Ben, who had the idea for this UI, brought it to them and said, hey guys, I'd like to increase your traffic by 7 times. Well, they almost fell off their chairs. But we ran the numbers at really large scale, and we found that Google Instant actually saves between 2 and 5 seconds for every single search. That's pretty incredible. And so at the time, we were serving at least 1 billion searches a day. So 3.5 billion seconds saved for our users every day. That's actually 11 hours of saving for every second of actual time passing. So clearly, that was the right thing for the user. And therefore, we found a way to change the whole organization of our search infrastructure to actually make instant possible, because fast beats slow.
Yeah. So on the marketing side, we also try to focus on the user. So as David explains, often our technology is very complex. And so what we want to do when we do our marketing of it, we want to take that complexity out of it and make it simple and make it personal. So often that means trying to bring it down to something that actually will make your life better. And here I've got an example, which is an ad for the Galaxy Nexus feature of Face Unlock. So there's actually a pretty serious user insight behind this, which is in this day and age, all of you walk around with your life in your smartphone. And if you don't lock your phone, I suggest you do, because people can get to your email, they can reset passwords on websites, they can look at your contacts, etc. So it's really important you lock your phone. But it turns out it's one of the things that people find really annoying. They hate typing in PIN numbers. So the Android team first introduced the swipe, which made it easier, and now it's Face Unlock, which is even one level up. Although it does make me wonder if that kid's not going to figure out that all he needs is a photo of his dad that looks enough like him to unlock his phone and play his games next time.
So the next principle of innovation is that we strongly believe that open will win. And this is both a product principle and how we run the company internally. So when I say it's a product principle, we work really hard to make sure that whatever we're doing is having a benefit beyond the developers that might use it at Google. So for instance, we use open source, and we make the code of products like Android and Chrome available to other developers to build on top of. And if you're wondering why that's not the Chrome logo, that's the Chromium logo. It's a blue version of the Chrome logo, and Chromium is the fully open source version of Chrome. But we also use open standards wherever they already exist. And if they don't exist, then we'll actually work with the relevant bodies or other folks in the industry to create those standards. So I'd like to show you an example of how we've actually done this in London. So I'll just switch back here. So this is a Google search page, and you might see that there's a little microphone in the corner here. The technology behind voice search was actually first developed as a collaboration between our London and New York offices, and it's something that I was involved in just when I joined the company. So this is pretty great. I can go ahead and maybe I don't have a keyboard, or I might find it difficult to type, and I can search for pictures of the Eiffel Tower. And right away I get my pictures of the Eiffel Tower. So that's pretty incredible, and we really wanted the power of speech input to be available across the web. And this was something that just started with an engineer in London who thought this was a good idea. And we've actually worked with the W3C and other standards bodies to make the technology that makes voice search possible available on any web page across the internet. And we've done that by introducing a special tag into HTML5 called WebKit Speech. And this is really pretty powerful. So this is part of the HTML5 standard. And imagine that I actually wanted to add speech input to an application. Like, for instance, imagine that I had developed a scientific calculator as a web page. Well, it turns out people have done this before. And here is a scientific calculator. It's really great. You can use it. But I'd like to drive this with speech input. Well, let's see how difficult it is to do that. I'm going to go ahead and use the developer tools built into Chrome. I can actually edit that input box. I'm going to edit its source code as HTML and add that XWebKit speech tag that was developed in London.
You can all do this at home.
You can all do this at home. And look, right away, there is a little microphone button. I can go ahead and say 500 times 10. And by working on open standards to put speech input across the web, it's that easy to speech enable any web page.
Which is awesome. So as David mentioned, we don't just believe in open technology. We also believe in open when it comes to data and when it comes to the way we run the company. So on the data side, we use user data for many things that make Google products better. So for instance, the Google Suggest that David was demoing as part of Instant, that's based on like millions and millions of aggregated search queries. So what's important here is that while we use your data, we want to be very transparent about the data that we have about you, and we want to give you control over it. So when you go to google.co.uk/privacy, you'll find a link to this page, which is the privacy tools. And there's a whole number of tools where you can set your ad preferences. You can, it shows you private mode, incognito mode in Chrome. And it also shows you the Google dashboard, where we show you basically all the data that we know about you. So that's a really important principle. It's also very much at the heart of how we run the company. So when I first arrived at Google, I came from a conservative retailer, and I was completely blown away by the fact that everybody's goals are on the internet. So we call them OKRs, and you can see the company OKRs on the internet, but you can also see every single individual's OKRs. So it's very interesting. You're meeting someone, you go, well, what's this person actually working on? We use Google Docs a lot for collaboration, and all the docs I open by default are shared with the whole company. So it's only if something's super confidential that I restrict it. So this kind of openness principle really runs through everything that we do.
The next principle is that we really believe that ideas come from everywhere. So a lot of you might have heard about 20% time. And in Google engineering, every engineer is invited to spend up to 20% of their time, so a whole day every week, actually working on something that's not part of their core job, but is a technology project that they're passionate about. And this has been a really important source of new ideas at the company. In fact, I find it difficult to think of an example of a product that hasn't gotten started through this mechanism, but some really great examples are Gmail, started as a 20% project, as did AdSense. So it starts with one person with an idea who can build a prototype, get other people enthusiastic and excited, and then take it out to a full product launch. And one of the ways that we actually encourage participation in 20% time in London is with a series of events that I run regularly called Demo Days. And what we do is we encourage members of our engineering teams to take a whole week as a block and come up with ideas for new products themselves in groups, and then actually build working prototypes. These are some of the posters that I've used to promote this to the team over the last couple of years. And what I'd like to do right now is just show you one idea that came up from the Demo Days projects in London just about 2 years ago. So what you can see here, what you can't see here, is my Android phone. And this idea actually came from the team that had been working on voice search, which I've just demoed to you. And we'd already made voice search possible on Android. And we thought, well, we'd like to go a bit further than that. Sometimes what I want to do by voice is not just find search results. Sometimes I want to have something happen in a specific application. So they built a demo in a week, which actually was fully functional. And then we added a lot of the polish that you're going to see afterwards before launching it. So this is voice actions. And with voice actions, I can not only search, but I can do things like, say, map of London. And the system both listens and understands that text and then figures out which application it should start to give me a map of London. And there we go. Without pressing any particular buttons, we have a map of London. Well, that's pretty great. I can even do pretty advanced things like, say, set alarm for 8:30 a.m. That would be a nice lie-in tomorrow. And there we go. My alarm is set. But we realized that there's some things that when you're actually speaking to your phone, you may not have a great application built in for. So part of the demo that they built during that week was also this one. Having trouble actually pressing the screen here. Note to self, get milk on the way home. And here I can really quickly leave myself a reminder and send an email. And then lastly, and this was the one that I think got everyone really excited, and I love this demo, I can do something as interesting as this. listen to Radiohead. Now, I mentioned that Android is open. It actually allows third-party applications to hook into system actions. And here we have Spotify doing a search and amazingly, instantly playing us Radiohead, which I think is pretty cool. So I could listen to that all day, but we better stop there.
Okay. So on the marketing side, we also very much believe that ideas come from everywhere. And this is one of the examples of an idea that won one of our internal competitions. So we run sort of like an internal Dragon's Den. And this is called YouTube Space Lab. And the idea is to use the power of space and the power of YouTube to inspire kids to get more into science. And the competition is for 14 to 18-year-olds to design an experiment that would then be performed by NASA on the International Space Station. So really pretty cool. This idea came from two guys, one in the Moscow office, no surprises there, right? Russians are really into their cosmonauts. And one guy was actually a guy working in the marketing strategy team, so he wasn't even working on consumer products. But it turns out he's a complete space nut, and he's had this dream for like ever to get kids to do these experiments. So we're very fortunate that at Google we can actually turn these crazy ideas into reality, and that's now a program that's live. We've just closed the submissions, and an international panel of astronauts and scientists, including Stephen Hawking, is now picking the finalists, and then the winner will be the winner's experiment will be on the space station this summer, if everything works out.
So the next principle is think big, but start small. And both of these are important. It's actually really common for folks to go to a product review at Google and leave with feedback saying, what you're doing is great, but you should think bigger. Don't think about solving a problem for London if you could solve it for every city in the world. Don't think about solving a problem for your search engine if you could solve it for the whole web. So that's really important, and that's how we achieve a really big impact. But sometimes that can be pretty daunting. So we also encourage teams to start small. So you've got the big mission, but figure out how to deliver just one little thing towards that shows that you're going in the right direction. And I think a really great example of this is what we do for book search. So not long after the search engine had been built, Larry realized that there is a vast amount of information in the world that you can't find or you couldn't find with a search engine at that time because it was locked up in libraries inside books. And it would be really transformative if all of the information in books was actually available to search on the web. But that's quite a daunting challenge. So what he actually did was he got the nearest book off the shelf and got out a stopwatch, probably not much different to this one, and timed how long it actually took him to turn every single page and photograph the page in the book. And by skilling that up, he realized that it was actually feasible to get people to do this and scan all the books in the world. And you can now search across that data, those data that are locked up in books, no longer on Google Search.
My favorite marketing idea of starting small actually started in London. So as you probably noticed, once in a while we change the logo on the homepage. We call this a doodle, and most doodles are made by a doodle team in Mountain View in California. But then somebody in the London office, when we opened our Victoria office, had this idea of inviting a school class of kids in the local area to do the logo. So we ran our very first Doodle for Google competition, and the winning kids' doodle was put on the Google homepage for a day. And then the next year, it became a nationwide competition, so there was thousands of kids doodling. And now, I think at the latest count I took, there's over 20 countries in the world that we've done it. So what started very small here in London is now one of our kind of most beloved marketing programs across the world. The next principle we want to talk about is never fail to fail. So David talked a little bit about taking risks, thinking big. So this is first of all about not saying no, but saying yes and trying things out. But it's then also about measuring the results and admitting when you've failed. And perhaps sort of controversially, I'm going to show you the evolution of Google's social products, because arguably that's one of the areas where we didn't exactly show ourselves in glory in the past. So you could argue that search was actually the first social product, and that was pretty successful because it's based on backlinks. So it was always based on input from people. But the first product that had social in the name was a product called Open Social. If you're not a developer, you've probably never heard of it. The idea was that it enabled developers to build applications that work in a whole bunch of different social networks. And that was great. Tons of social networks at the time signed up, except one didn't, and that was Facebook. So as Facebook grew, open social became more and more obsolete, and we eventually withdrew it a couple of years ago. The next product is Google Wave. So Google Wave was the revolutionary new way of merging documents and email all into one, and it was launched to developers to great acclaim. They all sort of waved their laptops in the air at Google I/O, our big developer conference. But the reality was that users never really worked out how to use it. Even inside Google, we couldn't really work out what to do with it. So I think the only team that really used it was the Wave team, and eventually it was shut down last year. The next product was Google Buzz. So that was launched in 2010. It was sort of like a microblogging and messaging platform that was integrated with Gmail. And that actually wasn't a bad product. It was very useful and so on. But what the team got really badly wrong was the privacy settings. So I talked a little bit earlier about how at Google everyone shares everything with everybody. So the Buzz product guys and the engineers thought it makes complete sense that your default settings are open. And it sort of took the list of people that you emailed a lot and that you chatted with a lot, and it made them automatically follow your Buzz stream, and it also made that public on your Google profile. Well, it turned out, as soon as we launched that in the real world, that is not how people want their information to be treated. And the engineers were genuinely aghast at the kind of huge backlash that they got. And it sent a huge sort of shockwave through the company and forced a lot of the engineers, particularly, to rethink privacy. And all of these learnings, you can't rely on third parties entirely. It has to be an intuitive user interface, and you have to look out for privacy, all went into Google+, and made that arguably a much better product. And I'll talk a little bit more about Google+ at the end and how we applied the learnings from the other products.
So you may be finding the prospect of having to fail out in the real world a bit daunting. The good news is we have also found some really great ways to fail fast or to get good learnings from our products before we necessarily unleash them on the whole world. And we call this dog fooding, after eating our own dog food. So what we actually do is that we employ the whole company as an army of product testers. And we ask folks to try stuff out, which is finished, but not yet about to be launched, and actually give us their feedback after using it for real for a few weeks. And this has actually allowed us to really make many, many product improvements, and is really a core part of how we innovate at the company by being really open to that feedback. What I'd like to do is to actually show you one thing that we changed that was quite substantial in a product that I worked on based on dog food feedback. So this product is called Google Voice. If you're not familiar with it, it's a product that allows you to have one phone number, which will then route to all of the phones that you might have, your desk phone, your home phone, your mobile phone, and also allows you to keep your voicemail in the cloud. And that's pretty powerful. So my team's actually built the mobile applications for Google Voice across a variety of platforms. And here I'm going to show you the Android version. So this is my inbox. And these are some voicemails that I've been left recently. I can go ahead and open this one up. So we were really, really excited about voicemail in Google Voice. We were sitting right next to the team that had worked on voice search and realized that it would be really amazing to be able to apply that automatic speech recognition software to recognize the content of voicemails. And actually, this is really great. You can read a text message of your voicemail when someone's left it. So we built this voicemail screen and actually had some really great ideas. So for instance, I'm going to play this voicemail right now and watch it carefully.
I know you're at Think Bigger today.
See, it's actually highlighting the words.
Let's meet at 7
as they
p.m.
are
at
read.
the National Gallery. Bye.
Okay, maybe not so easy to see here, but right here, I'll play it one more time. There's a little
Hi,
red
David. I know you're at Think Bigger
thing
today.
moving
I hope
along
it's going well.
as it plays.
Let's meet at 7
So we
p.m.
were really
at the National
excited
Gallery.
about this
Bye.
screen, and we put this into dog food, had a huge army of Googlers test it out, and in fact, Google Voice is well used at Google. And we got the most surprising feedback you can possibly imagine. The feedback was, we hate voicemail. And why did they hate voicemail? Well, you may be able to guess. It didn't look exactly as it does right here when we first launched it. So I just played a voicemail. That one, luckily, didn't have anything particularly personal in it. and it came out and you could all hear it. Well, the way that we first implemented voicemail on this screen was that it would always play back on the speaker, because that seemed to be the best thing for the user. But we immediately got pretty irate and very vociferous feedback from this army of Googlers to say, my really personal voicemail message just played in a meeting and everyone knows what I'm doing, or I was at the doctor's office and this really personal message played. So we were able to fail fast and add this little setting here so that you could play back just to you on the built-in speaker. And that way we avoided, hopefully, what could have been a massively bigger problem when we launched. So feedback like that is incorporated into every single one of our products now, and it's a really key way that we work at the company.
Great.
The next principle is launch early and iterate. So this is one that I'm sure many of you will actually have heard before and is actually pretty well adopted across the industry. But it's something that started with companies like Google. So back in the days before the web, companies would often really polish a piece of software before it was ready for release. And maybe then they would update it once a year, and again, a lot of polish would go into that process. But what we believe is that you actually have a bigger impact by launching as soon as you can when something is just ready, and then actually listening to that user feedback. So similar to the feedback we get internally, listening to the feedback from users and looking at how they actually use the product and focusing your resources on optimizing the parts that are actually used or where there are things that you can do based on their feedback. And so we strive to launch almost all of our products weekly and sometimes even more frequently. And as a user of Google products, you can expect to see improvements on that kind of a basis. And I think this has kind of commonly come to be known as innovation at the speed of the web, and it is well adopted elsewhere. But actually, iterating is even more than that at Google. One thing that we do a lot is run experiments. So if you're not sure whether to do something one way or another, why not take a small slice of your user base, give them both options, or give some of them one option, some of the other, and see what happens. And I'll very quickly just show you one example of that. This is a product that is pretty close to my heart because it's one that a lot of my teams work on right now today. It's called Google Offers. And quite recently, we added a feature to Google Offers to allow you to get much more relevant offers for yourself by telling the system where you actually spend your time. So we have this really quite nice interface where you can say, in New York, this is where I live, this is where I work, and add some places that are places that you hang out to the map. And that allows the system to actually pick much more relevant offers for you. But you can imagine that actually figuring out how to use those data, there are lots of different ways that you could do it. And it would be quite natural to have a big argument and spend a lot of time trying to figure out, kind of from an intellectual perspective, what is the right answer. Well, instead of that, what we did was that we took all of those different competing algorithms and made them all live as experiments, looked at which ones actually had the biggest user benefit, and that's what you now see out there in the product. So that's another example of launching early and iterating by experiment.
And we apply those same tests to marketing. So we launched our Chrome campaign, so the campaigns for the browser, about 2 and a bit years ago. And the whole campaign has been like a single iteration. So in many companies, they might spend a year planning a campaign and then sort of eventually bringing it to market and so on. We often drive our agencies crazy by asking them to launch stuff within about 2 months. But we really believe in that it's better to get the campaign out and then to improve the creative over time and to improve the media buy, etc. So we're constantly testing and we're constantly iterating. And this is an example of where we had a big internal argument about 2 different creators for Chrome. They were made by 2 different offices, and everybody had an opinion about, this one was nicer, this one was more emotional, it was more in keeping with the Google brand, etc. And we were about to test it with sort of, traditional market research moments when somebody said, why don't we just put it onto YouTube? So we put it into YouTube, into the skippable ads, where you can run an A/B test. And within a few days, over 80,000 people had watched these ads. And we got very clear results, because we could see which ad had been watched for longer, what percentage of people had watched the entire ad. And then we could also track all the way through how many had gone to download Chrome. And it turned out that the ad that a bunch of people, including my then boss at the time, Dan, didn't like as much, performed much better. So he listened to the data and we ran that ad.
the next principle is be a platform, because then you can float all boats. So we already talked about Android and Chrome being open source platforms where we make the source code available for others to build on. But being a platform actually goes for almost all of our products. We work wherever possible to make the product available through open application programming interfaces, or APIs, that allows other developers to build stuff on top of what we've got. And this photograph that you can see here is taken at our annual developer conference called Google I/O. And there, folks get together and learn about the latest changes or the latest features that we have available on our APIs. So almost the granddaddy of our APIs was the Google Maps API. And just after Google Maps was launched, it was a kind of revolutionary interface at the time, because you could actually scroll the map even though it was rendered on a web page rather than being a series of static tiles. We found that there were sites like housingmaps.com that were sort of reverse engineering how Google Maps worked in order to use it themselves. So some companies might slap a cease and desist order on housingmaps.com and say, no, this is for us. But we realized that Google Maps could be a platform. So we made it open with a well-specified API. And now we see that about 50% of the usage of Google Maps actually comes through the platform on other people's websites rather than just on maps.google.com. And really quickly, I'm just going to show you one of my favorite applications of the Google Maps API. So this is train times in London. And if you look really carefully, you can actually see here that the little pins are moving around. So this is based on looking at the departure boards for each station and putting the trains onto the train lines and showing where they are right now. And I think that's pretty cool.
Except for these ones that seem to be a little bit lost and heading into Hyde Park.
And just one more of these, because it's pretty cool. So this shows using two APIs. So this is called Walk Score. And if you're trying to decide where to live, it can be pretty important, at least certainly it is for me. I don't have a car, to figure out, can I get by just by walking? Well, I grew up kind of in the countryside. And if I put my postcode in where I grew up, you'll see that you're going to see it on a map. We're actually using the search API here as well to find all the places that you might need to get to, grocery, shopping, etc. And you can see here that where I grew up has a walk score of 13, which means I would be car dependent. I can confirm I was pretty car dependent when I lived there. But if I plug in the postcode of our office in Victoria, you can see that central London is, surprise, surprise, a walker's paradise. And so this is definitely something that we wouldn't have had time or inclination to build, but others can innovate on top of the platform.
Okay. And then our final principle is make it matter. So in many companies, the mission is just something that is stuck on a piece of paper that nobody really much knows. At Google, pretty much everybody that you meet can recite the mission. So it's to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful. And this mission doesn't just give us license to build have very big ideas about our products, but it also gives us license to use those products to do some good in the world in a way that only Google can using this technology. So one of these examples is quite a sad one. So we have a small team of mainly 20% time people who, whenever a crisis hits in the world, they evaluate whether Google could help alleviate this crisis. This was a person finder in the kind of paper world in Japan after the earthquake hit. And the Google team, within about an hour, had person finder in an electronic version up and running and linked from the Google homepage. And within like another hour, they had a whole page up with information that linked to the Red Cross and various NGOs doing work on the ground. So this is the kind of example where we think we can add value and we use the technology to do something good. A slightly more cheerful example is this, which is the Google Art project. Now, I could have also used this in the section where we talked about ideas coming from everywhere, because this, again, started very small as a project in Madrid where someone in the marketing department in Madrid thought, wouldn't it be cool if we scanned in some paintings in the Prado and overlaid them on Google Earth? So you can use that zoom technology of Earth to zoom in and out. And they launched it in Spain. They thought it was just going to be kind of like a locally interesting story. But in fact, people found it fascinating across the world. And it wasn't just fascinating for art historians who could suddenly look at a painting in greater detail than you'd actually be allowed to, you're not allowed to go that close to it in the museum, but also for, completely normal people who could suddenly look at paintings in the Prado. So we scaled this up, and launched, at the beginning of last year, we launched the Google Art Project, where you can use Street View technology, to do the inside of museums, and so you can wander around the museum virtually, and then you can also zoom into paintings, and a few of them are in unbelievably high resolution. So if you haven't been there, you should definitely go and check it out. At the moment, we're working with more museums to bring more online, so stay tuned for a launch here in the next few months with many more museums. Okay.
So Obi has walked you through our 8 principles of innovation, and she's now going to show you how all of these principles were put together in one product, which is Google+.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to do this really quick because we haven't got a huge amount of time left. Oh, yeah, can you just turn it off? So these are the same 8 principles, and I'm going to show you how we've applied them all to one single product, but I'm going to do them in slightly different orders. So the first one is focus on the user, and that is really about Google Plus being Google plus you, right? So if I can use Google without being signed in, but if I sign in, suddenly the whole of the Google world becomes personalized. So it's Google plus me. And this is a really important principle of Google+. So we didn't set out to build just another social network. The kind of motivation behind Google+ was actually to make the whole of Google better. And we can make the whole of Google better by adding you and your friends and the things that they share with you into the core products. So if I'm now signed in to Google and I do a search for the Galaxy Nexus, that phone that we saw in the earlier ad, I can see here that people have shared things with me. They've shared reviews, they've +1 things, somebody shared this article about it on Google+, and so on. So you can see, suddenly, if you're looking for a new phone, it's really useful to know that somebody might have this phone already, and you can go and talk to them. And the way this is different from other social products were very much like pushing the content at you when your friend decided they wanted to tell you about this phone, right? Whereas if you tip it on its head and you do it in search, it becomes a pull from you. So you find this information when it's most relevant to you. Another place where I personally find it really useful is YouTube. So YouTube, when you go into YouTube and you sign in with your Google account, on the right you see the recommendations that YouTube has always had. I seem to be getting a lot of crashes and a lot of space stuff, so that shows you what I've been watching on YouTube recently. But then if I only got recommendations based on stuff I've watched before, I would be missing all this amazing serendipity of people sharing videos, right? So they used to be sharing them with me in email, and now I can see what people have shared with me here. So arguably, that's probably more interesting videos than the things that the YouTube algorithm might be throwing up on the side. And then the third one is Maps. So say I go on Maps. I have this really fabulous gelateria that I love in Soho. If you haven't been there, I can definitely recommend it, Gelupo. So I can share this right here from the top right box with people and can say, I really love this place. So this kind of integration into Google is really kind of what's at the heart of Google Plus as a project for us. So you saw me share that there, and you might be saying, well, who did you share it with, right? So that's where we actually get into Google Plus, the product, and we get into the second principle. So remember how I talked about how we learned huge amount from Google Buzz and the privacy disasters there? Well, so what we built into Google Plus is privacy at the heart of it, and that is circles. So it turns out that in the real world, people don't want to share everything with everybody. They actually group people into buckets. And here you can see my buckets, my family, my London friends, Googlers, etc. So that means I can read my stream segmented by these people. I can see what they have shared with me. But of course, I can also share something. So for instance, if I want to share a photo of my son playing in the snow, I wouldn't be sharing that with everybody. I would only be sharing that with my family and with people that I really know well. So you only see about 50% of my posts in my public stream because most of them I would actually only share in a limited fashion. So this gorgeous picture of Casper. This also just showed you another functionality, which is all the photos from my phone are instantly uploaded. So if I lose my phone, which I've done before, I don't lose all the photos of my son. They're all still there. Okay, think big, start small is the next principle. So when we launched this product, we were actually extremely cautious, partly because of the failures in the past. We didn't want to make a big splash. So what we did is we launched it in field trial, which was Googlers inviting their friends and their family. So starting very, very small with just a few people that were invited. And we were really humbled with how the product grew from that. So when we then opened it up later, it grew very rapidly. And it's now at about 90 million users. Next principle is launch early and iterate. So we launched the product in field trial, and we were very aware that it wasn't the kind of most amazing, most sophisticated product. And there were some product features that we weren't quite sure about. So the team actually launched a new feature more than once a day. So in the first 90 days, they launched about 100 features. They're now up to over 200 in 6 months. So this is probably the team that, in the whole of Google that ships the most often and really kind of embraces this principle. Open will win. Another principle. So many social networks make it very difficult for you to take your data out. I won't name any names. You all know. And at Google, there's a small group of passionate engineers that feels very strongly that this is wrong. And they managed to convince all the other Google engineers that we should subscribe to something that they call data liberation. So that means users control the data that they put into Google products, but they can also take it out. So that means you can take out your emails, but you can also take out your Google Plus circles that I just show you, your entire Google Plus stream, etc. So if you no longer want to use a Google product, you can just shut it down. You can take all of your data with you. Be a platform, float all boats. The best example of that is really the +1 button. +1 is something we launched a few months actually before Google+, but it's really sort of come into its own with Google+. So if you go to an article, say on The Telegraph, for instance, you can see all the share buttons, and one of them is the +1 button. You can +1 something which is kind of, you say you like this, but then you can also share it if you want to push it more actively towards your friends. So that's really the platform. And that's being served about 5 billion times a day now. And then finally, I want to show you a couple of examples of how brands have embraced Google+. And so the principle here is really about ideas coming from everywhere. So in the beginning, the product was just for consumers, and that was deliberate for the first 3 months. We sort of kept brands off the platform, even though they were kind of like trying to get their way in. And then in November, we launched Google+ Pages. One of my favorite ones is actually Burberry, who were like a launch partner. They've done really nice things, like I love this GIF where it's raining in London. Apparently they're going to change it with the seasons, and they've posted some really great content. A lovely example is of Fiat. They used Hangouts, which is the multi-user video chat that's unique to Google+, that doesn't really exist anywhere else. And they used it for the Fiat designer to talk about, can you just turn it down a tiny bit? He's talking about like what he was thinking about with the car, and you can see him unveiling the car for the first time in the Hangout, and then you can see like Fiat fans in here. Now this is actually a Fiat Panda, so you'd think people wouldn't be that passionate about a Fiat Panda, but it was really amazing, and you can see the designer being really touched how he connected with the brand. And then closer to home, I want to show you this example. Cadbury was also one of the first ones on the platform. And they had this really great idea that to drive engagement, they were going to make a personalized chocolate bar. So they launched this. If there's any Cadbury people in the room, I'm still waiting for mine. I really like my chocolate bar. So it was like, the first +1 chocolate bar. So that was ideas coming from everywhere. And it's really every day I'm amazed at what brands are doing on the platform. And if you're not on it yet, please experiment. And I'm happy to have our marketing people help you with ideas if you need some. And then finally, making it matter, I want to show you one more Hangout. So this is a rather lovely story where the Dalai Lama was invited to go to Desmond Tutu's 80th birthday and deliver a speech. But for some reason, the South African government decided not to give him a visa. So they thought they would have to cancel the speech. Google in South Africa found out about this and got in touch with the Google Plus team and said, is there anything we can do? So within 72 hours, they had connected the Dalai Lama with Desmond Tutu through a Hangout. And I'll just play you a minute of it.
I already told them about you.
I heard.
And while it is a real pity that His Holiness cannot be here, we are so grateful for the world of technology that has come to us, and that we can have this conversation.
Now this I really very much enjoy. You see, although physically long distance, but I can see your face.
I just wanted to find out from you, why does the Chinese government fear you?
Some Chinese officials describe me as a demon. I immediately respond, yes, I have a phone.
Okay, I'm going to leave it here. There's many more of these examples on the Google Plus YouTube channel. So thank you very much.